Afternoon, everyone. Before we begin the body of our presentation today, I'd like to offer an acknowledgement of the First Nations people. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would like to acknowledge that this gathering today is being held on the lands of the traditional custodians. Again, and welcome to the Team E review of an application to the Human Research Ethics Committee. Team E is comprised of Kim, Tara, Amy, Pezzy and myself, Caroline. The scope of the presentation today will discuss 3 issues: what those ethical issues are, why they are issues at all, and how the application might be improved. We'll base our commentary on the National Health and Medical Research Council guidelines. In the interest of time and tongue twisting, from this point on, we'll refer to the NHMRC as the guidelines. The researcher has submitted an application to investigate deliberate self-harmers, perceptions of attitude, severity of deliberate self-harm, awareness of availability and use of support and treatment, and life satisfaction. The research question is not clear, and that's one of the issues that we found in this application, which will be discussed later. So the first issue is risk to participants, and we see that this issue has 3 component parts: emotional distress, inadequate supervision, monitoring of distress during the survey, and inadequate provision of contact details and support services. So why is risk to participants an ethical issue? Research that meets ethical standards must consider the welfare of participants and minimise risk of harm or discomfort. So let's first look at emotional distress. So you can see the relevant sections of the guidelines on the right-hand side of the screen. So these guidelines are saying that the researcher must acknowledge that there's a potential for participants who are vulnerable to experience feelings of discomfort, emotional distress when answering questions relating to self-harm. Sharkey and colleagues found that research with vulnerable people requires particular consideration, particularly when this research relates to emotional issues and risks. We now move on to monitoring, and you can again see the guidelines on the right-hand side of the screen. So these guidelines are saying that the researcher needs to provide a method of monitoring that provides a safe environment and provides enough information on how the research will be monitored. The researcher must monitor any process of ethical review and provide sufficient protection to participants. The researcher needs to be mindful of the vulnerability in the target population, and Pezzy will outline further considerations for this population later on in the presentation. So the third component part of the first issue is support services and contact details. So the application we reviewed lacked robust means of minimising participant risk. There is a potential here for surveys to be accessed by participants from different backgrounds, cultures and belief. For example, Roth, Colley and West discuss the unique customs and spiritual needs of Aboriginal populations and the need for tailored support groups for those who engage in non-fatal deliberate self-harm. The application does talk about providing a link to Lifeline, but as stated in the guideline 2.4, the process of communicating information should not just be merely a matter of satisfying a formal requirement. So from here, I'll hand over to Kim, who'll take you through some of the options for moving this application towards a more ethical one.